Hey there! It's been a while since I last saw you. What brings you all the way to Onderon? Well, in any event, I've got a special treat for you while you're here. Onderon's absolutely steeped in history. This planet and its moons have far more dark secrets than most people here in Iziz would like to admit. Onderon was the flashpoint that sparked off the old Sith Wars, and a lot of dark groups left their mark on it. Fallen Jedi, Mandalorians, even the Sith. Most people here don't talk about that side of Onderonian history. The people of Iziz prefer to keep their dark past buried and forgotten. But what do you say that we dig that dark past back up, eh? Though you might want to grab yourself a drink before we start. This is gonna be one long tale.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
First, some background. Unless you came here on autopilot, you probably know that Onderon is the only inhabited world in the Geetsly system, and the capital of the Inner Rim's Geetsly sector. Most of this part of the Inner Rim was explored over 10,000 years ago, during the Republic's initial period of expansion, but Onderon was apparently overlooked, or at least ignored. It didn't see its first visit until around 5,000 years ago, and it wasn't connected to the greater galaxy until many centuries later, when the lesser Lantilian route was blazed. Nowadays, it's a fairly popular stop. You get a lot of traffic coming in from Zeltros that stops here before heading out into the Rim. That wasn't always the case, though. Back when Onderon was first settled, the Geetsly system was uncharted and untamed. Onderon is the second planet from its star, and it's the only inhabitable planet orbiting it. If you stick around until nightfall, you'll see that it's got 4 moons: Suthra, Dagri, Ivas, and Dxun. The first 3 are barren rocks that orbit at a respectful distance. Dxun, on the other hand, doesn't understand the concept of personal space. Dxun's habitable, at least theoretically, with an atmosphere and a wide array of native animals, and it orbits closer than any other moon I've ever heard of. Closer than it should be possible for a moon to orbit a planet. It takes up a massive portion of the Onderonian sky, looming large day and night, and once every star, it passes so close that the atmospheres of Dxun and Onderon merge, forming an oxygen bridge that allows flying beasts to migrate between the moon and the planet. Onderon and Dxun have been described as twin planets, and honestly, it's an accurate description. Even their environments are similar. Both Onderon and its 4th moon are covered in jungles, which are broken up only by small clearings and ranges of mountains. The other thing Onderon and Dxun have in common is that they're not terribly hospitable. Onderon's original settlers found that out the hard way thousands of years ago. It's unclear whether they came here on purpose or whether they crashed, but one way or another, they ended up stranded on this rock without space travel technology. They were humans, that much we know, and they also seem to have not had all that much high technology, at least not at first. That left them completely unprepared to face the monsters that call Dxun Moon home. The plants and beasts of Onderon and Dxun have fascinated scientists for millennia, mostly for one simple reason: they're some of the most aggressive in the galaxy. They're so reliably aggressive that the Republic likes to use Onderonian biota for terraforming, since they can entrench themselves on new worlds pretty much overnight. Even the plants spread quickly. You'll see the purple leaves of Onderonian plants or the thick vines and trees of the Dxun moon on many fully destroyed planets as a result. For the most part though, it was the beasts that gave the early Onderonians trouble. Some of Onderon's beasts are mostly docile, and nowadays the likes of Arcanox and Dalgos are frequently domesticated. But most of Onderon's animals are vicious predators, from the lumbering Orlax to the fiercely territorial Boma. But the worst of all are the Drexel, enormous flying monsters with teeth the size of your arm and claws strong enough to rend Durasteel. Drexel aren't native to Onderon, they came from Dxun, but every summer they migrate back and forth between the two worlds, looking for easy meals in the wilds of Onderon. And the early Onderonians made for very easy meals. The Onderonians who survived the first onslaught of Drexel were forced to band together. They gathered into one settlement, which they fortified as best they could. Over the years, their weapons technology rapidly advanced, and they used it to defend their settlement against the annual Drexel onslaught. Over time, the walls of this settlement grew larger, and the settlement itself expanded, becoming the great city where we are right now, the City of Iziz. Even today, Iziz is the only city on the planet, the only city in the system even, but it's grown a lot since its early days. It covers 1,600 square kilometers and is home to 4 million people, the vast majority of whom are humans. The threat of the jungles has lessened somewhat since the city was founded, but the people of Iziz still keep within its walls, which remain heavily fortified and constantly garrisoned. Fundamentally, the Onderonians are, and always have been, warriors, standing watch over their battlements, defensive by default, and quick to see the unfamiliar as a threat. In keeping with this, Iziz has a long and proud military tradition, and the Onderon military has a lot of power in the city. They double as the city's police force, which seems like a bad idea to me, but it's been that way for thousands of years and doesn't seem like it will change anytime soon. The military maintains barracks, armory depots, and garrisons all over Iziz, and the city is also dotted with air defense towers crowned with turbo laser turrets. Obviously, these were originally built to defend the city against Drexel, but they've since been used to fend off Mandalorians and Sith alike. The outer barrier of Iziz is known only as the Wall, and it's absolutely enormous, a long row of huge rock slabs. The outer side is like a cliff, dotted with turrets and crowned with highly defensible battlements. Air defense towers are built into it at regular intervals, and the wall only has a single gate, which features a moat for added security. The battlements of the wall are accessed through a network of sky ramps, lesser fortifications that run all throughout the city. The sky ramps loom over most of the residential areas, dividing Iziz into quarters and sectors, and they're dotted with bunkers and towers. Access points for the sky ramps are clustered around the inner districts of the city for defensive purposes. The city is divided into a ton of districts, some residential and some industrial. Some of the notable ones are the lower city, which is poor and home to a bunch of armory depots, the south quarter where you've got industry and mining, and the merchant quarter, where we are right now, which is wealthier and devoted to commerce. You probably docked at the Iziz starport, which is just off the merchant quarter, overlooking the lower districts of the city. Iziz also has an undercity, mostly abandoned, which stretches for dozens of levels beneath the surface. Much of it is unmapped, and many who venture down into the deepest parts of it never return. There's also a track for swoop racing down there though, so it's not all spooky ancient ruins. At the heart of Iziz is the Royal Palace, the home of the regent and the officers of the Onderonian government. The original Royal Palace is located at the top of a steep hill, surrounded on all sides by battlements and watchtowers. The main gates are accessible only by a single sky ramp leading out from the merchant quarter, and all told, the palace is probably the most well-defended part of the city. There's a lot of priceless treasures locked up in there, after all. Even the regents themselves don't really live there anymore. Nowadays, the monarchy's relocated to the Unifar Temple down near Yolan Square, which is also very well defended. Speaking of the monarchy, let's talk about Onderon's government. Onderon's royal family has actual political power, unlike the monarchies of many worlds, which are little more than traditional figureheads. The regent has authority over the Onderon military, has final say over Onderon's diplomatic relations with other worlds and with the Republic, and acts as the chair of the Council of Lords. The council manages Iziz's internal affairs and is made up both of other members of the royal family and of unrelated aristocrats. The current king of Onderon is Ramses Denda, who rules from the Unifar Temple. The Onderon royal family traces its roots back over 4,000 years to some of the most revered leaders in Onderonian history, among them Queen Galia, who united the people of Onderon and brought them into the Republic, and Queen Talia, who staved off a civil war started by an early separatist movement. But the royal family has its origins with a line of far darker figures. and the dynasty was started by a tyrant that few on Onderon dare to even name, a Sith Lord. It's a part of Onderonian history that's taboo to talk about here, but we will anyway. 4,400 years ago, a Dark Lord of the Sith conquered Onderon, and his name was Freedon Nad. And as the story goes, he had once been a Jedi. One of the Jedi's most promising students, even. He was powerful and highly skilled, and he knew it too. For that reason, the Jedi Masters chose to hold him back, refusing to make him a Jedi Knight until he confronted his pride and his arrogance. Freedon Nad did not take that well. The story is that he murdered his master, left the Jedi Order, and then went off to join the Sith, as you do. Nad lived in the centuries just after the Great Hyperspace War, in which the original Sith Empire was destroyed, and in his time, everyone thought the Sith were extinct. But Nad traveled through the ruins of Sith space, learning what he could from holocrons and scrolls that the Jedi had missed when they purged the region. Eventually, these led him to Yavin 4, where he met Nalaga Sado, the Dark Lord who had started the Great Hyperspace War, who was apparently still alive after all this time. Sado taught Nad everything he knew, and then Nad killed him and became the new Dark Lord, of course. With his newfound Sith powers, he set out to conquer a world of his own, and he eventually picked Onderon to be his victor. Freedon Nad used his Sith magic to overthrow the original royal family of Iziz, and he set himself up in their place, declaring himself the king of Onderon. Nad ruled as a tyrant, and he banished anyone that showed the slightest opposition to his rule, throwing them out of Iziz to be mauled by the beasts in the wilderness. His reign was long and terrible. The people of Iziz were brainwashed into worshipping the Sith Lord, and many aspired to join his sect of Sith cultists. Many Jedi Knights who tried to help the people of Onderon were killed at Nad's hand, and over the course of several decades, the Sith Lord established near total control over Iziz, suffusing first the city and then the entire planet with the power of the dark side. Freedon Nad was eventually slain by a Jedi Knight, and the Jedi assumed that would be the very end of Sith influence on Iziz, but they assumed wrong. Nad's followers continued to rule Onderon in secret, and Iziz's next regent was one of his children, continuing the Dark Lord's royal line. Some stories claim that Nad's spirit stuck around to teach his descendants the ways of the Sith. The Naddists regained near total control over Iziz pretty much as soon as the Jedi left, and the people of Iziz continued to honor Freedon Nad as their god. 400 years after Nad's death, the city was still under Naddist control, and Queen Amanoa and King Omin, the city's regents, were both trained in the Sith arts by the spectre of the ancient Dark Lord. But not all Onderonians were under the thrall of the Naddists. Under Naddist rule, all dissidents were cast out of Iziz. This was considered a death sentence due to the dangers of the Onderonian wilderness, and it had been the punishment for the most serious crimes since the city's founding. But exile from Iziz wasn't as certain a death sentence as the Naddists believed it to be. Some of the exiles learned to survive in the wilderness. They banded together, and they started to tame some of the beasts of the jungle. Over time, they even managed to tame the Beasts of Dxun. They became the Beast Riders, and they stood in fierce opposition to the Naddist Tyrants in Iziz. I said earlier that Iziz is the only city on Onderon, and that's true. It's not the only settlement, though. There are a scattering of fortresses belonging to Beast Rider clans out in the wilderness, mostly in the highlands. Some of them are inhabited to this day, including Kira Fortress, the greatest of the ancient Beast Rider strongholds, which nowadays is a possession of the Onderon royal family for reasons I'll get to in a wee bit. Many Beast Rider clans still exist, carrying on the traditions of their ancient ancestors. The prominent ones are Clan Ezelk, Amroth, Klaska, and Dordrell. Even today, they tame wild Drexel and other beasts to serve as their mounts. With that said, a lot of Beast Riders have also fallen, as their brethren put it, becoming little more than petty thugs. Gangs of fallen Beast Riders have been known to shake down travelers, so you want to keep an eye out if you ever venture out of the city. The original Beast Riders soon gathered into armies, knowing that conflict with Iziz was inevitable. The Naddists had no interest in marching off into the wild to destroy the Beast Riders, but the Beast Riders weren't going to stand idly by while the dark side tightened its grip on Onderon, and before long, they all went to war. The war was started by the great Beast Lord Kinch Sunka, who led the combined armies of the Beast Riders in an all-out assault on Iziz. Sunka failed to unseat the Naddists, but his attack was only the first of many. The Beast Wars of Onderon raged for centuries after Freedon Nad's death. Time and time again, the Beast Riders would march on Iziz, and the Naddists would fight back with ferocity, turning the city's many turbo lasers against the Drexel Riders that swarmed in their skies. As the years passed, the numbers of the Beast Riders swelled as the Naddists continued the practice of exiling their criminals, and the Beast Riders started recruiting anyone who was cast out of Iziz. The Beast Wars escalated until the reign of the Naddist Queen Amanoa, who, desperate to end the war and crush the Beast Riders, requested assistance from the Jedi of all people. Amanoa tried to frame the Beast Riders as being savage, lawless raiders preying on an innocent, enlightened civilization, hoping that sort of imagery would dupe the Jedi into doing her dirty work for her. As the story goes, the first group of Jedi sent to Onderon were all young apprentices, and they bought it at first, especially after the Beast Riders kidnapped Amanoa's daughter, Princess Galia, before their very eyes. But the Jedi learned the truth after they pursued the kidnappers back to Fortress Kira, where it was revealed that Galia had gone with the Beast Riders willingly. She hated the Naddists and wanted to marry Oron Kira, the son of reigning Beast Lord Modol Kira, to help the Beast Riders overthrow her mother and drive the dark side from Iziz. The Beast Riders then carried out another all-out assault on Iziz, and this time, with the help of the Jedi, they were able to capture the city. Queen Amanoa was slain by the Jedi, and Galia became the new queen. She married Oron Kira as planned, uniting the Beast Riders and the people of Iziz, purged the government of the Naddists, and brought Onderon into the Galactic Republic. Some of the Jedi, including Master Arca Jeth, stuck around to protect her new government and finished cleansing the planet of Freedon Nad's influence, and they all lived happily ever after. Just kidding, of course they didn't. It takes more than a change in government to unbrainwash an entire city, never mind convince them to make peace with enemies they've been hating for centuries. Even though many people in Iziz leapt at the first chance to abandon the Naddist ways, there were still Sith cultists all over the city. Iziz was in chaos for the first few years of Queen Galia's rule, consumed by constant unrest. The Jedi did their best to protect her and her government, but there were only a handful of them, and the Naddists still had a few tricks up their sleeves. After a year or two, the Jedi determined that there were still potent sources of the dark side in Iziz, and that these were part of the reason for the unrest. The tomb of Freedon Nad, which at the time was located under the Royal Palace, was the strongest of these. Thus, the Jedi ordered a new tomb to be built on the far side of Dxun. When it was completed, 2 years after Galia's ascension to the throne, the Jedi attempted to relocate the sarcophagi of Nad and Amanoa to the new tomb. It was then that the Naddists struck. All at once, the Naddists rose up and caused chaos all over Iziz, while a strike force attacked the funeral procession and stole the coffins of Nad and Amanoa, spiriting them away to a dark fortress deep beneath the city. These Naddists were led by King Omin, Amanoa's husband. His studies into Sith magic caused his body to decay until he was too much of a vegetable to be a regent anymore, leading to Amanoa taking over his duties. Everyone thought Omin was powerless and mostly dead, but in reality he was just biding his time. With the help of the spirit of Freedon Nad and a metal armature that allowed him to move, Omin returned and attempted to take control of Iziz once more, now openly acting on behalf of the dark side. Omin's right-hand man was a dark Jedi named Warb Null, an armored warrior that even the Jedi struggled to defeat. With Freedon Nad helping them from beyond the grave, the Naddists were able to take control of Iziz and capture Arca Jeth, the Jedi Master in charge of the Jedi group on Onderon. Galia, Oron Kira, and the other Jedi were forced to flee back to Fortress Kira, where the Beast Riders held the line against the Naddists. Ultimately, they called for backup from the Jedi Order, which in turn requested Republic intervention. They got both. Several Jedi, including future Grandmaster Nomi Sunrider, were sent to Onderon to defeat the Naddists, and the Republic deployed battalions of rocket jumpers in yet another assault on Iziz. Ultimately, the Joint Jedi Republic Beast Rider Task Force was successful. Warb Null was killed by the Jedi Knight Ulic Keldroma, and King Owen died after his armature was destroyed, which caused his bones to give out and his body to crumple like a little tin can. Arcajeth banished the spirit of Freedon Nad from Onderon, cleansing Iziz of the dark side once and for all, and the Naddists were utterly crushed. Queen Galia was restored to power, this time with the fervent support of most of Iziz. In time, she was able to unite Onderon's twin civilizations, for real this time, stabilizing the planet and beginning an era of genuine peace in Iziz. And, as planned, the Jedi relocated the sarcophagi of Freedon Nad, Queen Amanoa, and now also King Omen to the new tomb on Dxun. Said tomb is probably Dxun's most imposing feature. The tomb of Freedon Nad used to be located in a lush clearing on the shore of a lake, but nowadays it's just a big mud flat, entirely devoid of life. Nothing can grow in the shadow of that cursed tomb. The tomb was built out of black rock and Mandalorian iron, designed to be impenetrable even to lightsabers, but it was eventually breached anyway. The design of it has also changed over the centuries, warped by the power of the evil that lies within. On the outside, it looks like a sort of ziggurat built into the side of a mountain, flanked by obelisks and sword-wielding statues. On the inside, a network of tunnels winds deep under the mountain, running between storerooms and a deep crypt where the sarcophagi of Nad, Amanoa, and Omen are stored. A ton of ancient Sith treasures collected by Freedon Nad used to be stored there, including Nad's old lightsaber, but most of that stuff was looted long ago. Speaking of Dxun, let's talk about Onderon's fourth moon. The people of Iziz call it the Demon Moon, and given that's where all the worst of the beasts come from, I think that's pretty fair. Dxun is a dark place in its own right though. They say it's a nexus of the dark side, and it has been since before Freedon Nad's corpse was parked there, though that certainly didn't help. Dxun is even more dangerous than Onderon, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy even. The jungles are denser, more wild and more aggressive than those on Onderon, and the beasts are worse too. Even the air on Dxun is harsh and hard to breathe, and the moon is racked by constant rainstorms. Every moment there is a struggle, an endless war for survival. A number of the plants on Dxun are carnivorous, and some, like the krasnal, will even eat humans if they get the opportunity. But the beasts are the real threat. Unlike on Onderon, everything that moves on Dxun can kill you, and will try to do so given the slightest opportunity. On the smaller end, you've got the Canucks, notorious for their willingness to eat everything, and the Malras, a subspecies of whom, known as night hunters, can make themselves more or less invisible. On the larger end of the scale, you've got Bomas, densely armored Zakeks, and of course, Drexel. All told, Dxun is a very inhospitable place for anyone who doesn't enjoy being devoured by ferocious beasts. The Onderonians left Dxun alone for the most part, even under the reign of Freedon Nad. They never even considered establishing settlements or military installations there. The oldest known structure on the moon is the Tomb of Freedon Nad, which the Jedi hoped that nobody would dare to visit if they stuck it on the far side of the Demon Moon. Unfortunately for the whole galaxy, this ended up not being enough of a deterrent. Just a year after the body of Freedon Nad was moved there, the tomb on Dxun was visited by a Jedi Knight named Exar Kun. Kun broke in and had a face-to-face encounter with Nad's spirit, who led him to Korriban, Yavin 4, and down the path of the dark side. Exar Kun ended up declaring himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, and using Sith magic to destroy Nad's ghost. Just over a year after the Naddist Revolt, Exar Kun and another fallen Jedi, Ulic Keldroma, started the Great Sith War, which threw the entire galaxy into chaos. During the war, Keldroma won the loyalty of the Mandalorian Crusaders in an honor duel with their leader, Mandalore the Indomitable. The Mandalorians were allies of the Sith in the war, conquering worlds in the name of the Dark Lords, and near the end of the conflict they set their sights on Onderon. Mandalore the Indomitable himself led the Mandalorian attack on Onderon, but he and his forces were defeated by the combined efforts of the military in Iziz and the Drexel cavalry of the Beast Riders. The Mandalorians were driven back to Dxun in disarray, where Mandalore, the not-so-indomitable anymore but never mind, was ambushed by the jungle beasts. Cut off from the rest of his men, he was overwhelmed and mauled. The Onderonians and the Republic decided not to pursue the Mandalorians who had fled to Dxun, figuring that they would all be wiped out in the jungle. This, they later learned, was a severe mistake. Even though Mandalore was killed by the Dxun beasts, many of his warriors survived, including one who found Mandalore's mask. By Mandalorian tradition, he became the new Mandalore, Mandalore the Ultimate. He rebuilt the strength of the Mandalorians, transforming them into the Neo-Crusaders, and he claimed Dxun as his stronghold. The Mandalorians built a secret fortress on Dxun, on the far side of the moon, not far from the tomb of Freedon Nad. For 30 years, the Mandalorians sent new recruits there to train in secret, amassing an enormous army meant for a grand crusade against the Republic. The new Mandalore taught that the Mandalorians should have a rapport with Dxun. The jungle weeded out the weak, and on the Demon Moon, war was the constant state of all life, something Mandalore believed the Mandalorians should learn from. By facing the monsters of the Dxun moon, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders became one of the most fearsome armies the galaxy had ever seen. 20 years after Exar Kun's defeat, they began raiding systems beyond the fringe of the Republic, slowly building an empire. A decade after that, they attacked the Republic directly. When the Mandalorian Wars began, they began from Dxun. Onderon was the first Republic world the Mandalorians conquered. One day, without warning, basilisk war droids and their Mandalorian riders rained from the sky, destroying the Onderonians' ancient defenses. This time, Iziz fell in a matter of hours, beginning a long period of Mandalorian occupation. And Onderon was only the first of many worlds to meet with such a fate. From Dxun, the Mandalorians commanded an armada that ravaged the Republic, which could do very little to defend itself. The Onderonians, for their part, resisted the Mandalorians. The Beast Riders fought a protracted war against the invaders, and in Iziz, General Vaklu, a member of the royal family, led a resistance movement. His cousin, soon-to-be Queen Talia, appealed constantly to the Republic for aid, but Onderon remained under Mandalorian control until after the revanchists joined the fight. If you know anything about ancient history, you probably know that the Republic begged the Jedi for help in the Mandalorian Wars, and the Jedi Council refused. But some Jedi went to join the fight anyway, led by two charismatic young knights named Revan and Malak. They turned the tide of the war, slowly driving the Mandalorians back, and after many long, bloody campaigns, they had driven the Neo-Crusaders all the way home to Dxun. Revan determined that an invasion of Dxun was necessary for the war to be won, and huge numbers of Jedi and Republic soldiers were dispatched to the Demon Moon. And so began one of the bloodiest battles in galactic history. The Battle of Dxun lasted for months. The Mandalorians fought tooth and nail for every scrap of territory lost, and Republic forces suffered heavy casualties at the hands of the jungle beasts. Revan's plan was to send in waves of dropships to deploy legions of battle droids first, which would be sent to neutralize the Mandalorians' anti-air defenses, following which the rest of the army would land. But this was only partially successful, and many troop ships were shot down during the subsequent landing, killing many soldiers and Jedi. The rest of the battle was an endless, bloody slog, defined by thousands of feints, thrusts, and sorties all over the far side of the moon, and only Revan knew how it was all meant to fit together. Whatever his plan was, it did eventually work. The Republic slowly but surely gained ground. As they did, the Mandalorians prepared to abandon Dxun, building supply caches deep in the jungle to store equipment in case they returned. When all was said and done, they allowed a few volunteers to stay and fight, while the rest of them abandoned their headquarters, which was mostly leveled by the Republic's final assault. Revan came out on top in the Battle of Dxun, but the cost was staggering. For every Mandalorian who fell, the Republic paid with 10 soldiers. Many Jedi were lost, and many others started to be corrupted by the war. Onderon was liberated shortly thereafter. A year later, the Mandalorians were crushed in the Battle of Malachor V. Soon after that, the Jedi Civil War began. The horrors of the Mandalorian Wars had turned Revan, Malak, and their followers to the dark side, and they became a new generation of Sith, waging war on the Republic. Onderon was spared this war. It was almost as if Revan didn't want to attack it. Once that war was over though, new turmoil started to brew on Onderon and Dxun yet again. It started with the return of the Mandalorians. After the Jedi Civil War, a new Mandalore the Preserver, arose, and he led his clan Ordo, to Dxun. There they set up camp in the ruins of the old Mandalorian headquarters, where they trained new recruits, tested themselves against the beasts of the jungle, and planned to gather the scattered Mandalorian clans. New clans that Mandalore recruited joined Clan Ordo on Dxun, where the Mandalorians made use of the supply caches left from the last war, allowing them to rearm. The Mandalorians stayed on Dxun for many years, but they're not there anymore. They seem to have abandoned the Demon Moon again at one point, though there's no records as to when. But the real threat to Onderon wasn't the Mandalorians, it was the Sith. And once again, the legacy of Freedon Nad was involved. Throughout all the wars that had happened on Dxun up to this point, the tomb of Freedon Nad had mostly been ignored. The Mandalorians didn't even know it was there, and the Republic didn't care. But after the end of the Jedi Civil War, one of the Sith remnants took an interest in the place. They were loyal to a Dark Lord called Nihilus, a lord of hunger, who sought to conquer Onderon to feed on it, and they secretly established themselves on Dxun, building a camp just outside the tomb. A Sith master, not Nihilus but a subordinate of his, set up shop in the crypt of the tomb, where he and his followers practiced dark rituals. This time, not all of the Onderonians were aware of what was happening on Dxun. These Sith had allied with General Vaklu, the second most powerful man in Iziz, who was planning a coup to overthrow his cousin, Queen Talia. At this point in time, the Republic was on the verge of collapse due to the infrastructural damage caused by 3 devastating wars in less than 50 years, and many people wanted their homeworld to strike out on their own, to secede and leave the Republic to its fate. Vaklu was one of those people, but Queen Talia was not. She was a staunch supporter of the Republic, and she remained steadfastly loyal even as her people started to favor separatism. These political tensions quickly pushed Iziz down the path of civil war. General Vaklu and his right-hand man, Colonel Tobin, had a great deal of power in Iziz due to their control of the military and the state media, allowing them to sway a large chunk of the population to their side. But they couldn't win a civil war alone, and they recognized that. Most of the military, even those who agreed with Vaklu, respected the chain of command and supported Talia when the war happened, and Vaklu knew in advance that they would. On top of that, Talia had the support of a Jedi Master, the famed Jedi Guardian, Kavar. Thus, Vaklu and Tobin made a deal with the Sith. They would allow the Sith free reign on Dxun in exchange for help winning the Civil War. When Vaklu finally made his move, the Sith carried out a ritual in the tomb of Freedon Nad that allowed them to control the Beasts of Onderon, which were pressed into service in Vaklu's army. Between the Sith and the Beasts, it seemed Queen Talia was doomed. But a number of other Jedi, led by a former exile, allied with her and the Mandalorians on Dxun, and they helped turn the tide of the war. A joint Jedi-Mandalorian task force stormed the tomb of Freedon Nad, killing the Sith therein and disrupting the dark ritual. This caused the Sith on Onderon to lose control of their beasts, and the tide of the war turned yet again. The Jedi exile, accompanied by Mandalore himself, dropped down to Iziz in a salvaged Basilisk war droid, landing in the merchant quarter and taking the fight to Vaklu's forces. She led the royalists in retaking the sky ramps and then the royal palace itself. Colonel Tobin was killed, and the victorious Queen Talia ordered General Vaklu to be lined up against the wall and shot. The civil war was over, but the cost was high. Iziz lay in ruins, and much of the city's population had been killed. But under Queen Talia, the city rebuilt. Talia's reign was long and prosperous, and thanks to her, Iziz remained in the Republic for millennia. Iziz grew increasingly wealthy and interconnected with the galaxy. Over time, however, the city's distinct culture faded, and the people of Onderon more or less assimilated into the Republic. But the culture of Iziz was made up by some Sith Lords, so you'll forgive me if I don't care all that much. Onderon had some minor crises during the wars of later millennia, including a brief succession crisis during the Galactic Wars that the Sith tried to use as a cover to destroy the Republic fleet in orbit of the planet. Onderon was also hit by an outbreak of mange at one point, which dramatically reduced the population of the local beasts, making it much safer to venture beyond Iziz. There still aren't any other cities, but nowadays there are cleared plains that are more or less safe for travelers, many of which contain shrines built by members of the local Unifras religion. Iziz officials still warn visitors not to venture past the tree line though. It's still a very easy way to die. And with that, I'll leave you to whatever business brought you here. Enjoy your time in the city of Iziz, and remember, stay out of the catacombs, stay out of the forest, and above all, stay as far as you can from the Dxun moon. The Naddist may have died off long ago, but their Dark Master's curses still linger on this world. As for me, I should be heading back to the starport. I've got business elsewhere that can't wait, I'm afraid. But maybe one of these days we can meet up again, do an in-depth exploration of some other place. Korriban, maybe. I'll see you then.